I am a mutt, which is true, in fact, of most film composers and a lot of people I've worked with in this business. A kind of self-made mutt. I spent my youth in rock and roll bands, and only after I'd exhausted the last of those did I decide to go get a film degree from NYU. And when I got to NYU, I had aspirations of being a screenwriter initially, although music was always my first love. And what happened inevitably is that the students discovered there was a musician in their midst and began to ask me to score their little movies. And at one point, I just went to the chair of the department and said, you know, forget about the screenwriting, I'm going with music. Can I create a sort of split major and combine the degree between the music program and the film program? And I was off and running at that point, and I've never really looked back. I went to Hollywood just in time to catch the advent of what's now known as the Disney Renaissance. And I went there with all intentions of making my fortune, so to speak, as a film composer. That's what I'd studied, that's what I knew, that's what my passion was. But I also had a young family to support, and I discovered very quickly something that will be one of my first lessons to the students here, which is you don't go into an industry like that blind, cold, without armor. You go in, you know, under the aegis of someone. You go in with someone's support. You go in with letters of recommendation. You go in with a fully developed portfolio, because the competition is as intense as it is in professional athletics. Realizing this, I thought, well, I'll put the writing career on hold for a bit and get myself a gig and try and figure out how the industry works. And that's what led me to Disney. And one of the things they say in this business, in addition to, you know, it's not what you know, it's who you know, which is only partially true, and relationships are all important, is that you have to learn the game first. And I thought, well, I'll go inside the studios, see who they hire, why they hire them, and what the process is. And once I've learned all I need to know, then I'll take off on my own. But those temporary detours often turn out to be career paths. And because I got to Disney just at the time they were developing a movie called The Little Mermaid, and that was my first assignment as an in-house executive producer for music. Got to know Alan Menken, Howard Ashman, the entire team behind that string of extraordinary hits. We, under Chris Montan, who was my boss, they assembled an amazing music team. And in those days, unlike right now, the people who worked for the studios really had to know music. They had to know how to produce it. They had to know, if necessary, how to jump in and help shape it. So as a result of that incredible energy and the zeitgeist and the time and everything, there was this string of successes. Double Oscars for Little Mermaid, double Oscars for Aladdin, double Oscars for Beauty and the Beast, double Oscars for Lion King. And if you can't make something of that in Hollywood, then you probably don't belong there. My hero as a young, aspiring film composer was Elmer Bernstein. Elmer Bernstein sort of single-handedly created the classic Western genre, the classic action genre. He was the guy I emulated. And my first target when I got to Hollywood was I said, I want to do a gig with this guy, you know. And the first Disney picture that Elmer was assigned to, I made sure he knew how much I thought of him. So we formed a bit of a relationship which lasted the entire time I was there. He was at that time doing a lot of work in Ireland. I won't go into the story, but for various reasons he had tried to form a composers union in Hollywood and was sort of blackballed by the studios for doing so. So he found a home in Ireland. And he came over here and produced some very memorable scores. Now, he wound up with a Disney picture that had a relatively modest budget, couldn't afford to record it in Los Angeles, and so he said, "We're going to Ireland, Andy." And at that time, the director of the Irish Film Orchestras, which was sort of the resident orchestra at Windmill Lane, was Bill Whalen of Riverdance fame. And so I came here to do this project with Elmer, fell in love with the place and the people, and remained connected to Bill. It's an experience that I haven't forgotten, even though it occurred back in the late 90s. I think it's extraordinary. I've worked at three master's level programs for film. They've all had to provide some sort of recording facility. And this is essential not only as a marketing device, but the students have to have a laboratory for trying out their ideas. Particularly when you're writing for live instruments, there are terrible mistakes you can make if you don't know what a given voicing of a chord or a given instrumentation sounds like. So you have to have some place to trot those ideas out. And most schools do it with a small, very modest-sized room and student orchestras. This place has a considerable distinction, and I'll just make one digression and say, and this is a bit spooky, but there is no musician, however much a rationalist he or she is, who doesn't believe in vibes. I mean, after all, music is a product of vibration. And you know, how strongly you move an audience has a lot to do with how you manipulate vibration. And there is even a very respected British scientist, Rupert Sheldrake, who has a theory called morphic resonance, the idea that creatures and the spaces they inhabit actually leave behind a certain kind of energy, vibratory energy. Now, if you subscribe to this at all, then a place like Windmill Lane is an amazing place to work. You've had not only Van Morrison, Kate Bush, U2, and countless other, marvelous pop groups here. You've also had some of the best film music of the last 2 decades recorded here. And all of that is still here, sort of contained within these walls. Now, beyond that sort of, airy-fairy side of the equation, there also are hard facilities here that are absolutely essential to aspiring film composers. Most important is the large room and the great console and the great technical staff. But beyond that, having access to world-class professional musicians for doing your experimentation is a real bonus. Music for any film, television show, or game is now developed usually in some sort of personal studio, a little cave that you create for yourself. With many students, it's a closet carved out of their first, studio apartment or something like that. But wherever they can set up the gear is where they write. And the ability to create convincing, fully realized demos that demonstrate your intentions to a director. And this is using digital instruments. At this point, you don't have access to live players. But the ability to do that convincingly has become an absolutely essential calling card for composers. And programs like this one, especially this one, allow the students to develop those chops before they go into the field. I think the fact that Pulse has made a deliberate decision, initially at least, to keep the program small and very focused. It's a boutique program. And when you have, when your group of master's candidates is, let's say, under 20, you know, the total number of people, it allows the teachers to focus on not only on the skill set that you need to be a composer, but on what I think is the single most important thing, which is the notion of personal voice. This is something that, again, only a vocationally focused program run by working professionals can offer students. And that is to say, the relationships you make here with the full-time faculty and the visiting faculty are relationships that are specifically meant, you know, in the program description to extend beyond your time here as a student. So when you have someone like Comrade Pope, he's a wonderful composer, but he's principally known as an orchestrator for people like Alexandre Desplat. Godzilla, if you've seen that, reflects a lot of his work. He'll be here 3 or 4 times a semester. After you graduate, he might be your first call. Christopher Young, another incredibly generous film composer, is one of the advisors for the program. Again, he might be your first call. He's even set up a pension in Los Angeles where international composers can come and get a break on their rent when they're first moving into town. And the same goes for everybody else who Derek has assembled in this group. These are all people who stand ready to support the students beyond the scope of the program itself.